In 2017, legendary guitarist Steve Howe was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the band Yes. A Londoner, Steve was in the center of the counterculture universe during the 1960s, calling for peace, dressing in flare pants with star and tinsel face painting, tripping on acid, and from time to time, randomly bumping into and playing alongside other rock royalty like Jimi Hendrix. In January of 1970, Steve Howe auditioned with the band Yes and officially became a member. At the time, Yes had recorded 2 albums featuring John Anderson, Chris Squire, Tony Kaye, Bill Bruford, and guitarist Peter Banks. In 1971, Steve Howe and the band released Yes's 3rd album, the Yes Album, which took the band to new heights. Steve and the band continued putting together classic songs like Close to the Edge, Starship Trooper, Clap, Yours Is No Disgrace, Roundabout, Long Distance Runaround, Heart of the Sunrise, Awaken, On the Silent Wings of Freedom, and beyond. Way beyond.
Musicians endorse love, we endorse peace, we endorse joyfulness, but you have to find it yourself, first of all. Before you can expect the world to become this wonderful place, you've got to work on yourself.
The rest is history. Yes is the most influential prog band ever, filled stadiums globally, and has sold more than 30 million albums worldwide. Thank you, Steve, for agreeing to speak with me about such a wide range of topics, including tech's impact on creating music, Earth's ecosystem, our interconnectivity, renewable energy, overcoming adversity, influencing the Beatles, and of course, the gates of delirium. Steve Howe, it is truly an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us on Some Future Day. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me up. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Where are you? Where in the world are you today?
Well, I'm really resident in London, but I'm in the West Country, which is a beautiful part of England called Devon. So up in the North Devon, it's more rural, and I'm hanging out here. I've got a recording studio and things to do.
Steve, is that just curious? Like, is the location in Devon one of the first places that you recorded with Yes, and then later went on to actually purchase the property? Is that the same spot?
We rehearsed in the house, yeah, and 10 years later, I did buy it. So it was really perfect for Yes, and continues to be perfect for myself. Being a Londoner, I was used to built-up areas, and then I came here, and suddenly there was the countryside. So it's great fun.
It sounds like such an interesting place from what I read. It's pretty old, huh?
Yeah, it's about, well, nobody really knows, but I mean, it's at least 200 or 300 years old. Yeah.
Interesting. And then you described it as having, I don't think you used these exact words, but certain nooks and crannies really caught my attention.
Yeah, some of it's quite low. It makes you wonder, were people shorter before? I don't know. But there's quite a lot of low beams. But also the roof is thatch. So that's a very traditional style in Norfolk and in Devon and lots of areas of the UK. We have thatched properties, and they're quite beautiful.
So it's nice. So as you after you purchased this home, if I understand correctly, you would bring your family out from London and not only just use it to rehearse, but actually use it for vacations as well. Well, I guess get out of the city type of vacations. Yeah.
Well, sometimes you start off with an idea and it evolves into something else. Initially, yeah, we just thought, oh, this is a family retreat kind of place, but it didn't work out like that. It continued being partly that, but about 4 years later, it started to become what it is now, which is, guitars and recording equipment and things like that, because it was a bit cramped in London doing that. So when we had the space, we realized that this was and actually, it's a business concern, although it's not a public studio, a lot of recordings are made here. And that's the way, we've been working out what's the viability or the sustainability of having a property will really mainly only if it's a studio in the context of business, But so we've even got solar panels, and we've started to think long term. Or we always have really thought fairly long term. But
that's interesting that you have the solar panels built over there,
not on the thatch.
Next to.
Yeah,
I see.
Somewhere
I
away,
see.
yeah.
Yeah, I was actually in a home recently in California that had it sounds like a similar setup with solar panels. Like, for me, I don't understand why the world has created a political football out of the issue of climate change. Like, just going back to the 60s and your roots a little bit, where the idea of preserving Mother Earth and just taking care of what we want was so important. Doesn't it make sense to embrace renewable technology if it's in front of us, and to use solar panels?
I mean, apparently we need to use every blooming thing we've got to get a grip on the situation, and maybe there should be more turbines in the sea, wind turbines in the sea, everything we can do. I mean, there is that part when you drive in LA to Palm Springs where they got 30 miles of
it's incredible
turbines. You kind of wonder, but it could be out at sea more. But it could be that we're going to make leaps forward soon. With battery technology, it's going to get smaller. The kind of thing that will help, and maybe will help us. But actually, at the same time, we've got so much that isn't helping us, and it's increasingly not helping us. Is the dependency on actually, getting oil and getting crude oil. There's so many things we're doing that if we keep doing them the same, the effects that other people are trying to implement, with global awareness, are going to fail. So it's unlikely, as you started out by saying, this. I think you were hinting at the fact that this really should be a world issue. There should be no divide politically.
Correct.
But how can we break down the walls that divide people? And if we could, the first thing we'd go is, okay, let's sort out sustaining the planet. Well, I've been vegetarian. I don't want to preach, but I've been vegetarian for over 50 years. And I did my bit, in that way. That was a choice I could make. But there again, I've not been part of the slaughter of animals,
right,
or the fishing of fish, or anything. Not that one would ever expect there would be no dependency on that. But similar to oil, if you see what I mean, if you put the two boats together, meat, and the generation, all the things that we go in to generate more meat, and then all the things we do. So there's a conflict that can only be aligned if countries really got together. So the barriers are very difficult, and I'm not here to say I know the answer. It's interesting when I see interviews with people, and the interviewer says, "Well, what's the answer?" And I feel like, listen, if we knew, you wouldn't have to ask.
Somebody that I'm very interested in is a German polymath named Alexander von Humboldt. And I actually pulled a quote that I thought you'd find interesting when he kind of talks about this interconnectivity that you're highlighting. And he says, insight into universal nature provides an intellectual delight and sense of freedom that no blows of fate and no evil can destroy. So even while we have like this global landscape where people are kicking around something that seems so obvious to you and me, I feel like over time, perhaps this connectivity of the ecosystem and of people will prevail.
Well, let me just jump in on something you just said, first of all. But yes, of course, it should. But I mean, Alexander Humboldt, I read his biography, and I was fascinated by this guy who said 200 years ago, that we're destroying the planet, when he went to South America and saw what they were doing 200 years ago. And I've mentioned that about half the concerts Yes did on tour, I've tried to get that idea across that somebody this guy Humboldt 200 years ago. So the fact that we've been told so often, we've been reminding ourselves maybe for the last 20 years that, the planet's in. And actually, as that's happened, of course, we've got to that pivot point. We're actually turning back to make things better. It's getting harder as we struggle to do that. And yet we're still generating the things that are a problem. And I doubt whether war can generate anything more than things we don't want, not only in the sheer miserable physicality of the awful atrocity, but also the damage to structures like 9/11. I mean, 9/11 pollution after that was incredible, of phones, of buildings, and asbestos and all this stuff. So I mean, we are always damn well erupting with stuff we like, a bit like the volcanoes.
It's
so
true,
there's no
it's
end
true.
to it.
It's almost like as if we don't like to go too far into our history as humankind, but yet we just keep on repeating these lousy things over and over. I read in your book that Hieronymus Bosch, or I think you pronounce it Bosch, is, I saw that you highlighted the Garden of Earthly Delights, which was created, I think, at the end of the 1400s, 1490 to 1510. And it exists for anybody that wants to know, in one of my favorite museums at the Prado. But why, if you look at that painting, it seems like the middle panel of the triptych and then the third panel of the triptych kind of highlights where we're going. Like you just said, we're going back into war again. We're destroying the environment again. We're hurting ourselves and shredding relationships again. And that was something that he painted back in the 1400s. And here we are in, right?
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, that's a great observation because, Humboldt's only 200 years ago, but that this is, it's an awful long time ago. To think that we've, I don't know what it is. I mean, what you could say is that humans are really dumb. We're really, really dumb, seriously dumb, to get so many things wrong and not get ducks lined up for security and safety. But I mean, that is human nature. It's a big problem. In fact, maybe at some point in the evolution, we'll actually come face to face with the fact that we're the problem, not everybody else. Or
it's
not
the human
every
condition.
Other thing.
I often say this about artificial intelligence now. People are afraid of new technology. And my comment is, you, the person, you're the problem. If you have nuclear weapons or nuclear power and it's in the hands of a bad person, the nuclear weapon isn't going to cause the damage. It's the people that cause the damage. And I think, to your point, we see this over and over again.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe we got to pick up the conversation that no matter how bad things look, people, not only musicians, but artists of other kinds, and generally everybody has got to keep positive. One's got to have an idea that, it sounds pretty bad, but, we can get through that. We can get through this. But, unfortunately, we might not be tackling the big fish first, and one of my sort of recent, gripes was when I discovered that pollution, 20% of it is only coming from crude oil in boats. 20%.
Wow.
Now, okay, so you can't solve that problem overnight, but the economics are saying sell, keep making that oil, keep selling. So there's this drive to keep selling this stuff, and it is actually the only way to keep the boats going at the moment. But we've got to have more vision. And Elon Musk has shown a lot of vision. He's thought of ideas that everybody went, that's silly. And then he's made it work. So we need lots of people who've got, and the people are out there in the technological field. I mean, high tech are developing lots of very hopeful ideas.
I think that, you know, the Elon Musk reference is really incredible, because what a big vision for him to say, I'm going to create SpaceX to essentially preserve mankind, save mankind from itself, to get us onto Mars, because he's predicting essentially that we're going to destroy Earth, which is insane, right?
Well, there's so much in what you've just said. Just to cut halfway, I mean, the fact that he has that overriding ambition, you know, that's helped create this incredible, you know, system of rockets and all that. I mean, bravo, you know, well done. But I mean, you know, I've always questioned the concept. Well, if it's difficult living here, just how difficult is it living there, and how do we get there, and how do we take stuff and all that?
Correct.
So let him have that dream, but let us at the same time, and him, make use of the, you know, what he's devised in the way of moving stuff around very rapidly, which is the other side of the coin, isn't it? I mean, if you can keep moving stuff around really quickly, you know, in space, that's pretty amazing. That's a new, you know, it's gone from like, you know, Uber to like space.
Yeah,
space.
It's really
well, space travel, as I say. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think I want to live here. I think this
you want to keep your feet on the ground?
I think you're going to keep me. I'm going to stay here.
I think didn't Bowie kind of send that message out with, was it Space Oddity, where he sent that message out, like, you know, get me back on planet Earth, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, people sometimes just come back from a holiday and say, thank God I'm back here.
Yes. I get it.
That's a sort of deep but trivial comment as well.
But like, you've been preaching this stuff, like you've been, you know, let's go back. Like we spoke about von Humboldt. Like, one of his quotes inspired me to reach out to you. It said, people often say that I'm curious about too many things at once, but can you really forbid a man from harboring a desire to know and embrace everything that surrounds him? And I really, in looking at your life, I know that people see you, of course, as arguably the best guitarist in history, truly, but you've lived such a rich life. It's fascinating, really, if people really dig into your interests and your belief system. If we go back to like London in the 60s, for example, which I think you mentioned, it was the center of the universe in the 60s, but simple concept that we're just bouncing off around right now is the concept of peace. You were in the 60s, in the late 60s, at the forefront of this movement. You were a hippie. I don't think Yes fans really look at Steve Howe as being, you know, that prototypical hippie. But why, like if I'm correct in saying this, like if we were arguing for peace back then, why does it seem so out of our grasp? Why can't we hold on to peace?
Well, I mean, 67 was great. And when I did go to audition for Yes, Bill Bruford, who I love dearly, whispered to the guys, I think he's a bit of a hippie. So yeah, I have been a hippie. But the ideals that we had were so rich and so, you know, supported by, you know, the Beatles and everybody. It was a period of thought that meant that surely the answer to everything is peace, you know, and love. And it sure is. And I still believe that greatly. And much like when my wife and I got into macrobiotics, there was another guy, Mishikushi, who was saying world peace through world food. So, you know, and then there's Rudolf Steiner, and, you know, there's people along the way who've all touched an idea to say, you know, that there's something a lot better we can do than throw mud at each other. We could, you know, engage and find what love is. And I think that the only... one of the reasons I'm still, you know, interested in not only talking to you, but playing the guitar and doing all this stuff is that there were points in my life where I made a few decisions for myself, which, you know, as I mentioned, veggie, and then I got into this meditation idea, which I never thought, you know, would interest me, but suddenly I went ding, and it did. And the longer I've done these things, the more I don't profess to be Zen, you know, to sound really cool, man. He's Zen, but actually, what the Zen ideas are very close to, you know, the hippies and Buddhism, so there was a great connection. There was almost like a thread around the world of hippiness and of spirituality, and, you know, there was, you know, the Maharishi and all that. So basically, there was an offering. The world was offered a route called love and peace and joy and happiness and music and art and great flavors. But I can tell you by 1968, the year after it, things got really grey. They got really dark, and I think the hippies went underground, and then we came out with prog music, which was another way of expressing psychedelia, because psychedelia was like wild and just go crazy. Never thought of doing this, let's do it. But in the 70s, yes, and all the other prog bands, we all put the music together. There was much more intricate, much more varied, much more influenced by outside sources rather than, Chuck Berry and the Beatles have moved everything on colossally. And I hope that prog bands also continued that moving forward, spreading the same message that the hippies were, that underneath all Yes music and our last album, Mirror to the Sky, is no exception. Musicians endorse love, we endorse peace, we endorse, joyfulness. And, but, you have to find it yourself, first of all, before you can expect the world to become this wonderful place. You've got to work on yourself. You've got to balance yourself. You've got to find out what you can feed yourself, if you like, not only in food, but in the things that you entertain yourself with, to make a better world for yourself, and then share that with the ones you love. So you asked me a big question. Why did it fail? I don't think it exactly failed. I think it got derailed, and it's still trying to come back. And it no doubt will be in the messages of artists, forevermore.
So I'm curious, Steve, when you mentioned I think in 68, you said it became a little gray. Is that because, do you feel like the drug culture, I didn't realize that it seems from my readings that you really partaked in LSD and do you feel that drug culture enhanced the peace movement and creativity, or do you feel like it actually moved towards this darkness? Because I know you came out on the other side in 1972 with being a vegan, no animal products, but you also haven't done any pharmaceutical. I understand from what I'm reading, no pharmaceuticals too. So I wonder, in your mind, do you think that the drug culture from the late 60s moved us into a grayer period, and then you came out of it in the 70s?
I can't say clear cut, but what I picked up from what you asked me about was that really there was a changeover of drug culture to pharmaceuticals. And when I have said I use pharmaceuticals as little as humanly possible, and that's very little compared to, half of America being on painkillers,
Yes.
So I'm thriving in the fact that I've let my body, go naturally, much like I've let my hair go naturally. Just everything's got to go natural.
You look beautiful.
There's no point in fighting it.
You look beautiful.
But I've not. It's an interesting point you raise. I don't quite know how to tackle it, because I think that the grayness I mentioned was a return to the realities of a less supported, less mainstream version of what hippies were doing. If that had gone into a sort of mainstream version, we didn't have to, wear stars on your forehead, but, it was greatly adopted, it might have clung on wider. So like I said, it went underground. And I think the people who wanted to continue making artistic music, had to find their own way. God, I'd like to be able to find something more to say about that, because it is a very, pinpointing something that most probably there isn't really an answer to.
Yeah, because, it seems like today, our leaders, whether it's cultural or political, they're not, it doesn't seem like peace, they care about peace as much as maybe you did and your peers in the 60s. I think your music obviously pushes that concept through, this interconnectivity, this harmony of the world, where we're just a part of it. But going back into the late 60s, before you even got to Yes, just to touch on your band Tomorrow, I think that was really an important moment in time. People tend to like put you into that psychedelic posturing. But I wonder from your perspective, like, do you think Tomorrow was even a psychedelic band?
Well, okay. You might not know, but only last year I released a new version of the Tomorrow album, which is a reimagined version, although we didn't add anything really, but we balanced it, we sorted it out, and we threw out some tracks that weren't psychedelic. And my goal was to make the record like the record it should have been back in 1967, which was in tune, in time, and basically psychedelic. And I think I've done it, you know, and the album's called Permanent Dream, and it's a reimagined version, a bit like what Giles Martin did with Revolver. He didn't really, you know, they didn't stick a new keyboard on it, but basically I did my own version of that and that was using technology which had really only come out in the last few years, where you can take a mono tape and then change the balance, assuming you're not trying to change guitar and keyboard balance, but you can change drum, you can change all the balance. You could, but we tried not to do that. We just treated it and improved areas, and in particular the song Revolution. So basically, I think that now Tomorrow is, I can say it is, but if you judge it on the first recording, it was a wishy-washy affair, and it didn't have the focus or the power of, you know, records by the Doors or the Byrds or, you know, the Beatles. It was, White Bicycle was commanding, and now this perpetual Permanent Dream is available. I think I can say, yeah, it is a psychedelic record. We were a psychedelic band, but I'd like to straighten out what you said about how much. I mean, I was a very light drug user, and I always was. And so basically, when people took anything, I usually took half and I said, I'm just going to try half of that. But basically, I didn't get caught in it, you know, like a lot of people did. So I took it occasionally, went quite mad and crazy and had hysterical moments and a few like scary ones. But basically, I didn't get an addiction to it. It wasn't like, whoa, don't touch that too often. So that's how it left me. You know, I had a fantasy I might, when I'm, you know, ancient, kind of, you know, do that again. But I would never, because basically I like where I am very much. I'm happy with where I am and who I am.
I understand. I really do. When you mention Tomorrow's song Revolution,
yeah,
was the original recording in Abbey Road?
Yeah, the album was recorded in Abbey Road. Yeah, and with Jeff Emmerich as well. You know, engineering. So.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So were the Beatles recording Sgt. Pepper at the same time that you were recording?
Yeah, we were quite used to seeing the Beatles. You know, they were very sweet. Well, not. I mean, the people who were like really just approached you just like normal people was Paul and Ringo. You know, they were like, they see you somewhere, they just say hi, or they even poke their head in the door, you know, and say hello once or twice, which was a buzz. But at the time, the perspective of the Beatles was, wow, this is a top band. But, you know, I mean, over the course of the next few years, of course, after Sgt. Pepper, which was the signature 1967 record, you know, I mean, everything on that thing was amazing, you know, the whole contrast. But look at the wonderful contrasts on it too, you know, with George's sitars and, you know, the songs and the imagination again to bring joy and happiness. It's really still a great album. And I think Beatles most probably could never be surpassed as the most inventive and, you know, important band of that whole era, you know.
That's really interesting that you say that. I have a lot of love for the Beatles. In fact, my son's name is Jude Sargent Beckman, for a lot of different reasons. There are double meanings in there too. So I thought you'd appreciate that. But pretty cool. I heard that the Beatles were inspired, when you talk about Revolution, the Beatles were actually inspired by you and your music. And you know, from that session, yeah.
It's been said that. I think there might even be some evidence. I can't quite piece it together, but yeah, what can I say? I'd be flattered to think that. But I think everybody was influenced by everybody else. You couldn't avoid it. The influences were strong and powerful. When Crosby, Stills and Nash came out, everybody went, vocals can be like this. Again, and of course we had the Beach Boys and the Byrds, were another fantastic. So America had some great bands, but I mean, I think the Beatles.
Yeah,
but there were other bands.
Did Ronnie Wood? I mean, the Stones were pretty cool. Also, didn't Ronnie Wood contribute to your album to Tomorrow as well? Did I read that?
There's some tracks with Keith West that Ronnie played on. He played the bass on some tracks that are on. I don't think they're on Keith West's album more than they're on either. I don't think they're on Mothballs. But Keith and I did a few. I did guitar for Keith on a few songs, and they basically had Ainsley Dunbar on drums. And one of them had a string bass player, but I can't remember quite. I think, to be honest, Keith went off and did some tracks where Ronnie Wood played, but I did run into Ronnie, and then I played guitar on them. So.
What was the UFO Club like? I'm kind of stuck in like London hippie era. Like, was the UFO Club like the center of the London hippie scene back then?
It was really. It was the kind of one of the earliest and most probably the longest running. There were competitors that were totally different. Like the Savile Theatre on a Sunday evening. That was another center, and there was the place called Middle Earth, and then there was Chalk Farm, which I think they called that Middle Earth once as well. But there was a place in Covent Garden where I remember playing a few times. But no, if you played the UFO, you knew you were in the centre. It was very much the London centre, and it was really, really seriously crazy. And when you walked in there, you didn't know what was going to happen. And because there'd never really been a place where the projection was used in that way, and the music was all this wild, free-running stuff, improvisation. And I used to roam off for 10 minutes.
That's amazing. So, like, Jimi Hendrix jumped on stage with you once when you guys were playing there?
Well, that is true, yeah. What used to happen in these prolonged breaks, they're initially bass, drums, and guitar, and then gradually things would fall away, like Junior would put down his bass and start dancing. And so... which I say that, I think, are you serious, Steve? Yes. And basically, and that's when Jimi Hendrix picked up the bass. So he plowed into it, and we just roared away. I have no idea if anybody ever recorded it, but it's unlikely. But it was a great moment, yeah. And we saw him in Blazes. In fact, we'd met him before that.
That's when you were living there?
We were the resident band on a Thursday, and he came in on a Thursday and played for the first time, I think, in London. And so we were or maybe came on a Wednesday, and we were there. We hanged out in Blazey. It was the place to be. And he just joined the table and said, "I hear you're the resident band." We kind of So,
you met some really interesting people, Steve. Like, everybody obviously puts you, rightfully so, as like the face of Yes and these other amazing bands like Asia and GTR, et cetera. But like, what was Jimi Hendrix like? Was he did he come across as a kind person? Was he inspirational somehow?
In our fleeting meetings, I couldn't have drawn any of those conclusions. But he was always relaxed. He was smiling. He was a fun guy. There was no heaviness that I could spot. In fact, a lot of other musicians came across pretty heavy, but Jimmy didn't. He was light and breezy, pretty happy-go-lucky.
Yeah. What about Syd Barrett? Like, the world, the universe has painted this image of Syd Barrett being like this genius that went crazy. And I know that you knew Syd Barrett. At least I've read that you knew him as well. But what was he like?
I didn't know Syd. I knew Syd less than I knew another guitarist who did become a victim of LSD. But I mean, it's not for me to judge what these people are like. All I know is, I know what Pink Floyd have said about him. And of course, they love him dearly. And yeah, they wish he hadn't gone, off the edge a bit, because there was a talent, and you can see it all over the first album, fantastic, But it didn't get reined in by himself. Sid didn't rein himself back. So, as I mentioned in my book, there was a night when I thought I was going to play with Pink Floyd, and I was rather excited. But when I got there, Sid had showed up at the very last minute. I mean, I was about to go on stage with them. So obviously that was, in a way, a good thing. But in a way, I would have liked that opportunity to have done that. But I didn't know anything I was going to play. But it didn't matter. Then I would have just been in tune with whatever they played. But it was a wild idea, just bringing me out of Tomorrow and standing in. But that was because there was a beautiful guy called Steve O'Rourke who managed both of the bands, Floyd and Tomorrow. And he was one of the partners of Tony Howard and Steve O'Rourke, and they were great. I'm sure they put me forward. Steve,
was that the Brian Morrison agency?
Yeah, they were the people who did the day-to-day work, the real work. Brian was like an entrepreneur. Yeah, I mean, he was like the entrepreneur. He poured the champagne.
There you go. He played the champagne, but he got you going. I mean, at one point though, it became difficult for you, right? Like before you got into Yes, right? Before you joined the band Yes.
Yeah.
There was like a rough part there in your career.
I mean, after Tomorrow, and Keith and I didn't really know what to do. He was going to go solo. I helped him a bit, and I did some recordings. And On a Saturday is one of them, and that's a lovely, lovely song. I love that. So basically, after that, then I met this band called Bodast, who became Bodast. I mean, that was a kind of living nightmare for about a year and a half, just because it was so difficult. The music was really quite strong, and we had a lovely singer called Clive Skinner, Muldoon, and Dave Curtis was the bass player, the other singer. So it had something, but you just can't say. Like it was a follow-up, a further dark days, after Psychedelia. I was happy, I was living in North London, I had my favourite guitar, my 175, and then before the 70s ended, I had my first son with my first wife, Pat, called Dylan. So, in a way, I was quite happy. But and you do find contentment at odd times, and
Steve, did you name your son Dylan after Bob Dylan?
Yeah, and also like Dylan Thomas, because that was a Christian name where Dylan had been used, and
then if I read correctly, Dylan was born on the same day as your song Clap.
That's right, Clap. I wrote Clap that night.
Wow.
As around the time he was being born, and it's a hard thing to follow, but I love writing tunes. I've written another 20, 30 other guitar solos, but Clap really did start it off. I mean, in a way, you need something. It's like a snooker game. You've got to get a game, you've got to get a frame on the board. So Clap came out from my love of Chet Atkins, but also the excitement of having a son.
So it's kind of interesting because it's the fabric of the universe that came together with the life of your son, the life of your music. Maybe there were difficult times with that band, but in your core, I imagine your soul is you're an artist, and that will always be with you. So even when you hit tough times, were you just always confident that your music would just continue forward?
Well, I mean, I don't know, always but always hopeful. I thought I could, I'd done some of my grounding, in the first 10 years, and therefore, give me a shot. And I could look back at guitarists, even when I got a shot with Yes, who'd missed the shot that they'd been given. I'd seen guitarists who'd floundered when they were successful. And that was a habit in the 60s well, if it wasn't the guitarist, it was somebody else. But, I would notice guitarists who'd, like David Liss, he had the Nice, and they were a great band, But, like Sid, and a few others, they got over into outside of themselves instead of focusing on themselves.
one last question that I would have for you is this. I think, like, when you mentioned Clap, it's such a pure song. And then we see technology drive through so much of Yes's music, from Tormato to Relayer. Relayer is like really my favorite. Close to the Edge. I'm curious, from your perspective, as we go through this time period where we're going to have AI generated music and more of computers creating music, do you feel that we're going to lose something as let's say, machine-generated music replaces individuals?
There's no doubt we will. Of course we will. But if you look back over the stepping stones of technology in music recording, each step, I mean, I couldn't get, like the fax machine, in technology, you couldn't wait to get rid of that damn machine, and get something else. And I think that those kind of leaps happen. But when you look back, you suddenly realize that some of them had great benefits. And this is the dilemma with CDs, where's the bass end? It doesn't quite feel the same. And, records, you do feel it in the way that the bass end is transported through your speakers. It's just different. It's analog. So there will always be a slight price to pay. I mean, I like to think that we're moving 2 steps ahead and 1 back all the time. So they would make these jumps. And who would have known, the difference the internet would make to our lives and how it's changed so many things, like us talking, and with a quality of sound that isn't like a phone, like it used to be, even if it was going through a satellite. We are good.
It's incredible. Well, Steve, look, can I ask you one more quick question? Yes or no question? So do you think that Gates of Delirium is a sad song?
Well, I think it's a song about war, about fighting, it's about battling, but I think the sort of redemption of it is soon. So I think if you look at the overall curve, you've got this like ferocious stuff and some of it's this and that, and then suddenly you're in soon land. So I think soon is a soothing resolution and gives one tremendous hope. It's a very emotional and touching song, as opposed to the other stuff kind of shouting. It's more shouty.
Steve, you've given us a ton of time. All of my guests, it's a tradition on the show. The show is called Some Future Day. It was inspired by James Joyce. It's a reference to James Joyce. And what I do is I start the sentence and then my guest finishes it. Would you mind if I did this with you, please?
Well, try me.
Okay. So let's keep it on theme. Some future day, the world will find peace if
we carry on believing, but also get active.
Beautiful. Steve Howe, I cannot thank you enough. It is literally an honor meeting you today. Thanks for joining me today. It really means to me.
It's been my pleasure too. Nice, Marc. Thanks a lot.
I know your time is very important, so thank you so much for joining me today. For ongoing insight surrounding these important topics, you can join the conversation on my social media channels, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Marc Beckman. And to sign up for my newsletter on Substack, you can find me at marcbeckman.substack.com. To make sure you don't miss a show, be sure to subscribe to Some Future Day across all major platforms worldwide, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Special thanks to New York University for producing Some Future Day, and a big shout out to my producer extraordinaire, John Boomhofer, for being patient and always encouraging me to push through. Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day.